Cambodia had become a pawn in a much bigger conflict.
This is not an invasion of Cambodia. The areas in which these attacks will be launched are completely occupied and controlled by North Vietnamese forces. Our purpose is not to occupy the areas. Once enemy forces are driven out of these sanctuaries, and once their military supplies are destroyed, we will withdraw.
Nixon announced that he would go into Cambodia to do what he called dealing with the heart of the matter. This was a fateful decision because it led to the destabilization of this pathetic regime headed by Lon Nol. Lon Nol got sucked into a war in Cambodia. That war led to the rise of Pol Pot.
Hidden in the jungle was an enemy Nixon was hardly aware of. As America fought the Vietnamese, a more sinister army, Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge was getting stronger by the day. By the early 70s, the Khmer Rouge, Cambodia's communist rebels, were a deadly but secretive army. Their leaders were completely unknown, and the outside world had never even heard of Pol Pot, who, at 47, remained the rebels' undisputed leader. America simply assumed the Khmer Rouge were controlled by the Viet Cong, and when they made peace with North Vietnam in 1973, the U.S. thought the ceasefire would apply to Cambodia as well. In secret, Pol Pot broke with Vietnam and insisted he would fight on. He needed a new ally. From his jungle base, he lured Prince Sihanouk, his oldest enemy, into an alliance designed to win over the masses. When Sihanouk arrived at Khmer Rouge headquarters, his welcome was deceptively warm. He met the man he thought was the rebels' leader, Khieu Samphan, who'd once served in his government. In a blatant lie, Samphan told Sihanouk the rebels would restore him to the throne after they won. Throughout the whole charade, Sihanouk never guessed the real leader was Pol Pot, quietly pulling the strings from the sidelines. To many ordinary Cambodians, Sihanouk was practically a god. With him as figurehead, the Khmer Rouge would prove unstoppable.
Now the small band of Khmer Rouge who had been headed towards oblivion are suddenly given a new lease on life. And it's the use of the nationalist theme, the nationalist cause, which allows the Khmer Rouge to grow and become stronger and seize state power.
Fighting under the flag of the monarchy, Pol Pot soon brought Lon Nol's government to its knees. In the areas he controlled, Pol Pot was already burning entire villages in the name of communism, destroying the traditional way of life.
There was a sense of doom in the country that people didn't like to address. I think many Cambodians in their heart of hearts quaked when they thought of the future.
As Cambodia reeled out of control, President Nixon began a last-ditch effort to stop the communists by launching one of the most intense bombing campaigns in history.
It was very, very weird. You could literally go to the roof after a dinner party and watch the B-52s drop their loads in the distance. I mean, you can't imagine anything more bizarre than that. They were dropping 20, 30 tons of bombs on a square where they believed troops were, and the earth would go up. And at night, it was like the earth turned rose-colored and went up half a mile in the air, perhaps. It was extraordinary.
The bombing didn't stop the Khmer Rouge. Cambodia was now in chaos. Caught between the Khmer Rouge and the American B-52s, the people had nowhere to turn. Over 1 million refugees poured into Phnom Penh. As Pol Pot laid siege to the city, food and medical supplies were exhausted.
You could go inside and literally stand there 20 minutes and 3 children would die in front of you. Little infants, all shriveled up, coughing and gasping and spitting mucus up and then just die. There was no food supply coming from the countryside by that time. The economy had been totally disrupted, and the only rice that was coming in was from an American airlift, and it wasn't enough.
In the turbulent final days of the Lon Nol regime, anyone who could scrambled to get out before the Khmer Rouge came in. On April 16, 1975, U.S. Marines evacuated their embassy, and America's 6-year war in Cambodia came to an ignoble end. The world had abandoned Cambodia to its fate. At dawn on April 17th, the Khmer Rouge entered Phnom Penh. For a brief moment, there was a sense of hope.
First hours were celebration after the Khmer Rouge came. And people were out they were putting white sheets out their windows and flowers. They would put flowers into the barrels of guns. Everybody was saying, "C'est la paix," peace is here. Monks would get onto jeeps with the Khmer Rouge.
The euphoria was short-lived. Within hours, an air of menace filled the streets as Pol Pot's troops showed their true colors. Later that day, all of the city's 2 million people, even the sick and dying, were ordered into the countryside. Anyone who resisted was shot. Everything was going exactly as Pol Pot had planned.
We were watching one of the most extraordinary human dramas of the whole century. That in a small backwater country, something was happening that had taken totalitarianism to a new level.
24 years after he joined the Communist Party in Paris, Pol Pot finally had his revolution. Now was the time to make his utopian vision a reality. Within days of the Khmer Rouge taking power in 1975, Phnom Penh was a ghost town, all of its residents forced into the countryside. At 50, Pol Pot was now running Cambodia, but he was nowhere to be seen.
He has no celebratory march into the city. This is unheard of. He takes no credit for it outside the world, and he only quietly comes in himself. I compare him to one of those night animals who doesn't like the daylight.
Pol Pot did have a triumphant rally, but only for the Khmer Rouge army. This secret footage shows his new cabinet, made up entirely of the loyal communists he led since the 60s. The government remained clandestine. It was simply called ANCA, or the Organization, and few knew of the extreme plans Pol Pot had for Cambodia. He wanted to restore the glory of Cambodia's ancient civilization at Angkor Wat